Please call the roll. Clerk.
Councilmember Chase Williams, District 1. Here. Councilmember Iyer, District 2.
Here.
Councilmember Madison, District 3.
Here.
Councilmember Devitt, District 4.
Here.
All present.
All right.
Mayor report.
All right. I've been wondering why I haven't been called. Reports, presentations. Any reports, presentations?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this work session today is to review with the council the proposed city budget, the annual budget. It has been advertised. Our public hearing is scheduled for February the 26th. March the 12th, we'll have a council meeting for you to consider the adoption of the ordinance. And today's meeting is to review the ordinance in detail. There are a few things that I'll be discussing with you as we, in particular, reach the mayor and council budget. Some things I'm going to talk about you at that point. Chris Pike, who is here, our finance director, is going to lead us through the budget.
Morning.
Morning.
As we're all aware, we've had a draft of the proposed budget for about a month now. I've gotten a few questions, but not many. Haven't gotten any from the public, and only a few from the press. So most of the questions that have come our way have been secondhand, either by reading online or reading the press reports. So, one of the things that is important for the council is to understand the impact that the budget has on meeting the goals and objectives of the city. Just about everything that you do as a council will have some sort of financial effect, either cost up front or revenue or expense down the line as a result. So a lot of times this essentially becomes one of the most important resolutions that you approve each year. So with that in mind, it does warrant some discussion, some interaction legally. It requires a public hearing just to kind of make sure that it's properly vetted and understood by everybody involved. One of the things I would challenge you to do is focus on the high level, big picture items. One of the old war stories I like to joke about is I actually had a council member come to me and say we could save a few pennies if we switched from number 2 pencils to number 1 pencils. And that is the truth. It really did happen.
That's public for it.
So I would challenge you to not get too far into the weeds and really stick to the high level. What are our main goals and objectives? Rely a lot on the city manager and the department heads to help you reach those goals and provide you with expertise on what financially is required to get there. So that being said, the document that you have in front of you, if you want to start, I would suggest we start over on page 5, which is past the verdict and the budget message, which kind of summarizes the budget, starts getting into the actual meat of the document itself. Something else I'd like to point out is that over the past couple of weeks, and we'll continue to get more information even throughout the year, but obviously we know a little bit more now than we did a month ago, and you're going to see some changes and some, this item may increase and this item may decrease. City manager indicated that there's some items we get further on into the council's budget that she wants to address, and everything that's happening today will probably have some changes that come of the budget. So it will be fluid up until the time you actually approve it on the 12th. You'll have public input again during the public hearing in addition to what's already been said. I know some comments were made at the town hall meeting, etc. So don't consider this the static document. You'll be voting on this particular with all these exact numbers. It will change and it should change to reflect what you need to adopt the policy. The revenue numbers here, one thing I will point out, that they currently do not include any of the debt revenues. The way governmental accounting works, debt is considered a financial resource, a revenue in governmental funds. You may remember when Peachtree wanted to release their budget, there was this big uproar about, oh, it's so much more than we originally anticipated. Well, a big part of that so much more was because they had, I believe, around $1 million loan for their startup expenses that's considered revenue. And a lot of people said, you know, we thought we were going to get this size budget, look, it's double what we said. So what I didn't want to do is show it here, but when we actually get to the resolution, you'll see line items for some of that debt. That's actually going to help, because one thing that I would like to point out on the revenue side is the very first line for real property taxes. I had an old copy of a feasibility study, and apparently Carl Vinson had revised that based on a updated property valuation, and the more recent digest had the revenues even closer to the 5 million mark, not the 6 million mark. So we'll adjust that number accordingly. Everything else, I believe, is still fairly good estimates. So I wouldn't look to change any of these numbers, at least initially. But obviously, decisions that take place could have an effect on here. There was one question that was brought to me, that which revenue numbers do we think will have the most volatility from what the feasibility showed, what we know to be true, and where do we think we'll see these big adjustments in? And I would say it's the ones where it was just simply estimated based on population. For example, hotel-motel taxes. I believe what the feasibility study did was it took the county-wide hotel-motel tax and then prorated that to Brookhaven's population. I think that's a very low estimate, because Brookhaven has a proportionally higher number of hotels than I believe the county as a whole does. So, you know, but again, you want to budget conservatively, and then when you have additional revenues, decide at that time where you want to use those revenues.
Do those taxes come directly to us, or do they flow through the county then?
They will come directly to us, and then they come to us on a monthly basis. The city have 9 hotels, I believe, in Brookhaven, and I know as of the 21st, we have gotten payment in from 8 of those. And the 9th one is probably postmarked by the 20th, we just haven't got it yet. But those are coming in. The alcohol wholesalers have started remitting to us. I believe we're somewhere around $500,000 already in business license revenues. So the funds that should be coming into the city are starting to come in. The business community has been very receptive. We haven't had any problems reaching people or communicating with them, or not being able to address their questions. So I still feel overall your 15.7 is a good overall number, especially considering the $1 million that we have already agreed to execute with the BB&T loan for the startup cost. So I don't see anything there changing, other than that we'll probably drop the property tax down to $5 million and add in that $1 million line that we took for the startup capital. When the police comes on board, obviously there may be additional loans that we'll take to get their police force outfitted. A lot of that's not included in here now. We're just looking at really more the operational cost. That, any questions on the revenue piece?
Could you just clarify then on the real property tax line item, what tax base is that based on, what year?
That would be the most recent digest that we have available, which is the 2012. Don't have 13s yet. We won't have that for probably 2 more months.
And was that lower than the 2010 and the original Carl Vinson?
Yes, the 2012 was lower than the 2010.
And do we have any sense of whether that, whether it's continuing to drop, or, because I remember when the property tax digest came out last spring, is it? Our area held fairly strong comparatively. And I think it's only a 1% change in the tax digest. It might have even gone either plus or minus 1%. So this number is large, so the 6 million is the 2013, or you think that's
The
good?
5 million would be the 2000. I think the 5 million would be a 2000, a good 2013 number.
You mentioned it's going to decrease slightly in 13. What's your expectations for that?
It will decrease.
You say the tax digest decreased slightly in 2012. What's your estimate? What is your estimate, or what are you hearing that decrease is going to be?
I'm not hearing anything. I'm just basing on what I'm seeing. There's a lot of new residential development coming online. I think what we've noticed over the last 3 to 4 years is all the vacant constructed homes. That market has dried up, either from actual homeowners or investors coming in and developing it as rental properties. And with that dried up inventory, I think we're seeing some stabilization, not just nationally, but even in the Atlanta market. Obviously, you're going to have some depressed areas that are still struggling. I don't think those are impacting the north area of DeKalb as much as they are in other areas of the metro Atlanta area. So I feel, and I'm hopeful, that there is a bottom that's been reached at this point in the real estate market. You're starting to see some upward pressure on mortgage rates, which indicates a little bit of momentum going back up again. So with all that, I don't think we'll see that much change over 2012. Commercial properties still a little soft, partly because businesses are still a little reluctant to bring on expansion of their employees. But I don't think it's at a level where you're going to continue to see it going down.
On the host number, can you talk about that a little bit? It is my understanding that sales tax revenues have bumped up. And is this number reflecting that, or is this conservative estimate?
Well, the sales tax collections is only a piece of the puzzle that determines how much you get for host. Part of what you get from host depends on what level of capital the county decides to use the host dollars. They're allowed to use up to 20%. If they go that full 20%, the cities will receive a substantially larger amount. I'd say that number could probably go up to around 6 million if they do that. If they say, no, we're going to use 100% of that for property tax relief, then I think you're going to be closer to this 3.5 figure. So that's one component of it. Another component is the proportion of residential property in Brookhaven to the county as a whole. That's another piece of it. So proportionally, let's say the county valuations drop more than the Brookhaven valuations drop, then that means you're going to get a bigger piece of the host dollar. And then there's a third component that goes into that, and that is the spread between the unincorporated tax rate and the Brookhaven tax rate. There's a provision in the host law called equalization, and it's basically to compensate the residents for what they're not getting as the host credit because of the city tax part is not eligible. So all three of those factor into it in addition to what's actually collected. So collection will go up 5%, but that doesn't necessarily mean you'll see a 5% bump in your host dollars. What this number here represents is my best estimate as to what that number would be if the county elected zero capital, 100% property tax relief. Now, mid-year, when they set their tax rates, if they come back and say, we're going to do 20% for capital and 80% property tax relief, at that point, it would be an excellent opportunity to say, okay, here's an extra $2 million. We can go ahead and start a paving program sooner, or we can take over the park sooner, or we can buy our police rolling stock rather than finance our rolling stock. It gives you options at that point. I just think it would be premature to take those options now. It's always easier to add than it is to take away.
Have you ever seen, I'm sorry, have you ever seen the county set anything lower than 20%?
Absolutely. As you know, Dunwoody is not that old. Our second year, I believe they did 99.7% property tax relief and 0.3% for capital. And I would say it's especially more vulnerable when the CEO's up for election. It'd be nice for him to come out and say, look at this big property tax relief you're having on your bills.
But they also like big capital improvements too.
They do, but I think what you'll see is the fact that the cities are going to be getting, because of the way the formula is computed, the cities are getting such a big portion of that 20%. I would venture to say that if they did 20% capital, Dunwoody's going to be somewhere around 5.5. Brookhaven's probably going to be somewhere in the 6 to 7 range. That's 13 million out of a 20 million pie. That's just for those two cities. The incentive to say we need capital money diminishes when they don't get as much of that capital. So all of it is such a variable number. I'm not saying you can't go in and say, well, we think they're going to do 20%. Let's go ahead and bump that up to 5, and if we can always go the other way. I'm not saying you can't do that. That's just not my recommendation.
This is basically zero.
This is basically zero.
And I thought that the host taxes we receive in actuality next year. Are you saying that we actually would get the 2013 this year?
It's my understanding we should be getting the host dollars this year, starting in August. Dunwoody got it their first year. Now, we didn't get it until much later because of the lawsuit, but we did collect 2009 host dollars. And that was our first year.
One other question on the hotel motel tax, is that portion, I understood there may be a portion of it that we need to dedicate to reinvestment in tourism,
Yes.
and then there's a portion that we don't need to.
Yeah, this is the portion we don't need to.
Okay.
And when do they set that host number?
That will probably be done late June when the countywide taxes are all set.
I know there's a possible difference on the Georgia Power number that's expected to be done in the first year. Is there a possibility we might get some of that this year?
Yeah, my understanding is the contract calls for a 25% estimate to be paid in the first year. This budget does not reflect that because that contract was just executed recently. I talked to Georgia Power yesterday and told them to please try to determine how much that 25% is going to be. I would say conservatively, we probably could, I would have no problems estimating that to be somewhere around 300,000. I would much rather have them come back and say, yes, it's 300,000.
That's on your agenda also for Tuesday to approve that agreement.
Along the same lines, I've spoken recently with Comcast, and they've been trying to reach out to and get information on subscribers. And in the conversation, they're willing to go back to our incorporation date and basically pull those money that they spent in DeKalb County. I would hope that, is that money's in here?
Yeah, this reflects 12 months for Comcast, Atlanta Gas Light, AT&T. It reflects 0 for Georgia Power, so we would want to add in the estimate for Georgia Power. And hopefully, they were actually in the last week and a half in the process of cutting the checks to all the cities. So it was difficult to get them to do anything besides work on that. They handed those checks out yesterday, so now they should have a little extra time to come up with this estimate. And it's my hope that they have that before the public hearing, so that the document that's in front of you Tuesday, we can go ahead and make sure we have a number to give you at that time. I don't know if it'll happen that quickly or not, but I would venture to say it's more likely we'll know it by the 12th.
Do we have any hope that they will go back to incorporation date or at least to the beginning of the year?
I know that's something Marie was going to talk to them about. I have not brought it up to them.
The Comcast that I spoke to said they could go back to incorporation days.
That's good.
Chris,
Go ahead.
on the grants that we've gotten done in the first year, I know in the CDI study it talked about, you know, the state community development block grant. Is that something that the city could go after and pay?
The city can go after it. There's a couple things to recognize there. Usually that's a reimbursement type grant. So you apply, you wait for months and months and months, even years sometimes. You get your answer. Then you go out and spend the money, then you get reimbursed. Because this is almost, it's called modified accrual, but it's almost a cash basis document. It's not going to include any of that revenue. Also, because it is a reimbursement type grant, once you receive it, you're going to immediately have an expense offsetting that revenue. So you can book the revenue, but you're also going to be booking the expense. For this purpose, operation-wise, it really doesn't affect us.
I'd like to just add a comment to that too, just so that you all keep it in the back of your mind. We're going to be pursuing two routes. One, you know, taking a look at our own eligibility to file for that money and funds. And that's, you know, you file and it's a year in advance. So you're waiting, you know, because there are funding cycles for which you can apply. But because of DeKalb County's entitlement privilege, they go directly to HUD. And so we're looking at that too, about our ability to go directly to HUD. But in the interim, I am working on setting up a meeting with the county to look at the full amount of funds that DeKalb has received, which includes the eligibility of all unincorporated, which we've also been Brookhaven community before incorporation, and to see if we can get some of those funds earmarked back to us for projects. So the purpose of the meeting is going to be, one, to identify what projects they've assigned for the Brookhaven area, and what is their timetable on implementing those projects. And more importantly, if we find those projects are not really in the purview of what mayor and council would like to see, you know, how we can make those adjustments. And that can occur, but there's like an amendment that you go through with HUD. So for this first year, we're going to be looking to the county to share more of those funds that are assignable to Brookhaven, see what we can do, and then we'll pursue applying, you know, on our own. And there is a threshold too with HUD. If you have 50,000 population, you're automatically entitlement privilege. If you're not, and we're hovering right under that, so you know, we really need to understand what our true population counts are. And we know that there are a lot.
The council folks down your way, get us over 50.
Well,
We
exactly.
just need to do a recap.
Well, that's, well, you know, there are ways to prove that, to show that those that did not respond to the census, and to be able to demonstrate that. So, you know, it's cumbersome, but it can be done. But if we could get those funds from the standpoint of entitlement privileges, it is much easier, because if you're going through the state CDBG program, it's highly competitive, and they really, you know, zero in on, you know, the principal factors of the HUD program, low and moderate income. But there is a component under entitlement privileges where you can look at economic development and infrastructure improvements and senior citizen programming and capital. So important that we get with the county to see what they're doing with Brookhaven's determined allocation, and then what we can do to pursue on our own. So, and I'll be reporting back to you in the next few weeks after I get my arms around that, where we can go.
That's something we're very interested in.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
we've had the discussion, particularly for the low moderate income housing
Right, exactly.
stock that we have, and trying to
Right. Well, my
find
hope
money
is,
to increase it, even if
right,
it's just code for it.
exactly. Well, the long-range plan is to leverage those grant funds against other grant funds, so that we can make the pie a little bit bigger to be able to do a multitude of activities. So it's a good way to do that, but we need to have control of the money before we can even think about leveraging. But yes, I will be reporting back on that.
I guess I have a question on the millage rate. The 335, on my rough estimate, represents as much as a 100% increase over the net tax citizens have been paying for the last 4 or 5 years. Have we looked at anything to bring, while we're not getting the host tax credit as a city, that has gone away? That's had a huge impact on what people will be paying, even though the 335 on a number basis is lower. What actually comes out of our pocket will be substantially higher because we've lost the host tax credit. Have we looked at ways to reduce the residential property tax burden and what effect that may have on the budget? Because right now, this budget, in my mind, is a 100% increase for the residents.
First of all, it was my understanding, again, I'm going to go back to 2011, the bill was first circulated, because I know there was some changes last year. But I believe the unincorporated tax was somewhere in the 6.39, and then there was a host credit that reduced that to amount closer to the figure that's at our count of 3.35. Then last year, for numerous reasons, the county reduced the unincorporated millage so that it was no longer 639, it was a lower number, but I don't remember what the number was. But it was still well above the 335. The 335.
No, it was actually, for the police service and unincorporated tax district, it was just over 4 mils.
Okay, so they dropped from 639 to the 4 mil.
But when you introduce the host tax credit, it
brings
drops
it down
down
to
to 1.5 mils.
1.5.
That's, and again, I'm just doing rough numbers. I'm taking my tax bill and dividing them by the assessed value. What I actually paid, again, the net amount due, it was 1.5. In the last 5 years, it's been 1/6 average for the last 5 years.
Right.
2011 was the only year that was above 3, and it was 3.05. Everything else has been below 2. Again, I'm factoring in the host tax credit, which to me is effectively what my tax bill is. It's the net amount of pay that what comes out of my pocket.
Yeah, there was a difference in the Brookhaven bill and the Dunwoody bill in that the Dunwoody bill set the cap at that spread and had included a host-like millage rate reduction for residential property owners. So the city millage rate is 2.74 there, and they got a 1 mil reduction for residential homeowners. The Brookhaven bill did something a little bit different in that it took what they considered the host credit going from the 639 down to the 3.35. They took that and applied it to everybody, residential and commercial. I don't know that was the intended effect, but it essentially gave a rather large tax reduction to the commercial property owners in an attempt to keep the residential level. Then after the bill was introduced, then of course the county went down substantially on the millage rate last year. One of the reasons that they announced is that they had this huge surplus that they were going to apply. It was take a one-time credit, and then the next year would likely go back up again. We really don't know what they're going to do until.
But it was a political move.
Yeah,
But
for
again,
various reasons. But all that being said, this year the thought process was there are 2 substantial revenue lines that we do not have in 2013 that we will have starting in 2014. One being Georgia Power, the other being the insurance premiums tax. That should boost revenues up somewhere in excess of $4 million. And that 2014 would be the financially responsible level to readdress the property tax rates, either by increasing the homestead exemption so that it applies just to the residential homeowners in town, which means you can do a bigger reduction or make it across the board for residential and commercial, which the level would probably be a smaller number. So the short answer to your question is the solution here was in 2013 to have it at the higher level, but then in 2014 bring it to a level that's significantly more competitive than what we see at the overall incorporated level. And that's obviously a policy decision. If you say we want, 2 million carved off of the property tax revenue, then you've got to turn around and find 2 million to cut off on the expense side of it as well. But that's certainly a choice the council can make.
I don't know that we want to come up with a number. I think that, the two options that you laid out, whether it's an increase in homestead or decrease in residential property tax millage rate, need to be looked at. And I would hope that we can have some numbers to see what, based on our tax digest, those two options, what kind of impact those two options would have on the tax rate. Because again, what we're looking at now with not a whole lot of increase in services is a dramatic increase in the residential property tax rate.
Yeah, that's definitely something that can be done with digest.
I'd like to see it sooner. I'd like to see it before we vote on this. We could, based on the estimated digest that we have in here.
Are you asking before March 12th? Okay.
I'd like to see what.
I'd like to see what impact either an increased host would have, or a 1 mil or some. Give us a couple numbers. Decrease in the residential property tax bill. What kind of impact that would have on?
Yeah,
Because again, we are providing, as you said, we are providing a substantial increase to or decrease, to the commercial tax base, but we're not providing that to the residential tax base.
A sliding scale on doubling or tripling the homestead exemption, what the effect would be on property tax bill, and what if that affected the budget as well. So,
Yeah, the current homestead exemption is 20,000.
Yeah.
Is that right? Doubling that probably won't have the effect that what we're talking about here, like 1 million reduction or something like that. But what I can do is I can come back to you and say, if we double homestead exemption, it's this. If we go to a half a mil, it's this. If we go to a whole mil, it's this. And I'll give you those
Yeah,
numbers.
that's
Absolutely.
And I have one other question. You mentioned that, for instance, on the business and occupation taxes, that you're already seeing those coming in at a good rate. Based on what's actually coming in the door, is this 1.8 million a good figure? You think it might be higher than that?
I think that's still a good figure to stay with. They should be coming through the doors right now. So when I say we've got about a $500,000 that's come in so far, that's what I would expect to see.
But things like the hotel motel, which is a monthly average, is that what you've seen? The actual, is that match up with the projection?
Yeah, I haven't looked at those numbers yet. Obviously, when this was sent out, we hadn't received any payments at all. So certainly one of the things I want to take a closer look at is how much is actually coming in. Did they pay us just from January 17th, or did they pay us for the entire month of January? What numbers are coming in? And once I have those figures, I can come back and say, I think 300 is too high, or I think 300 is too low, or where it needs to be.
But the county also did sort of a recent switch to fire services tax millage rate and whatnot. I know there were some rumblings, and I've been contacted about possible legal challenges to that. Have you heard from any other cities or about possibilities for that?
I have not.
One thing we've talked about from a revenue standpoint with the city manager is an increase in the streetlight fee for the commercial districts. Can you, and I realize it'll be an estimate, but can you find out what the numbers would be?
They're working, Chris and Richard, as of yesterday, started working on that. And we're looking at different formulas. We're looking at,
If it's 300 for residential, it could be that or more for the commercial.
well, actually, we have some residential neighborhoods that don't have any streetlights, so therefore they're not being charged. And then, so we're looking at different formulas. And and we're going to look to Chris and to Richard, but one is to have whoever has a meter, we have a flat fee, tax, whatever that could be. The other formula is to use what's already in practice, and that is the front foot amount. So we're looking at both of those, and then even exploring more if there's even another idea to come up with the formula. The hope is that by including the commercial base, we lower the residential, and we have a consistent formula across the board as to whether you're residential or commercial. Makes no difference, but there is a fee. So my guess is, and hope is, that we're going to see a substantial increase to that, but we've got to make that, that we can explain it and it's fair, it's consistent, and we can collect it. And
but from an implementation, it's based on meter, it's got to be a tenant driven. If it's based on the front foot, it's going to be an owner driven.
correct, yeah, exactly. Right.
It seems like the latter would be, particularly if you have to build on the property tax.
That's right, yeah, and that's the other issue, the logistics of getting the billing done. It's easier to have it on the tax bill. We don't have a utility, a water or sewer that we could tack that on a monthly or quarterly basis. So, there's a lot that goes into, one, just exploring the idea of how much that could be that we could receive as a revenue stream, and then what formula we base that on, how the point of collection, and I would prefer that we stay with the tax bill, and we would then have to inform the county, and that's part of an IGA, that they would have to perform that service for us, and I'm sure there's going to be there might be a charge back to us for that. So again, we need to explore that, and then before we launch it and bring it back to the council, we'll be talking with you about potential revenue, so you'll know how we're attacking it. But Bill Riley's going to have to be sure that we are legal in doing that, because we'll be one of the first cities that is doing this. But to look at the idea of this potential revenue stream, the first and foremost purpose for it is to pay the energy costs of all these lights. Second is to look at the areas that are dark in the community and light them up. And then if there are other grant programs that are associated with streetscape improvements, that's our fund for match. And it will allow us to jump out there and really take care of certain areas that are potential for high caliber recruitment. So if we start making an investment, we can show the corporate world that if we're putting money into it, we want them to put money into the area too. So there's a whole economic strategy behind the collection, but Chris is the formula man, Richard is the infrastructure man, and the legal guy's got to take care of sure that we're, but it really could be a model for other cities, and I'm very excited about exploring this. So we'll have something to you soon.
There was a bill floating around, and I saw one of the GMAs about taking these things off property tax bills.
HB 122.
Right.
Is that, what do we know about that? Is that something we need to anticipate?
This is a bill that initially it wasn't on anybody's radar. It was flying through both sides, and I put the brakes on it personally. Started talking with both government affairs and Ways and Means, explaining the impracticality of sending out multiple bills. The initial legislation 2 years ago said you won't even have it in the same envelope. It's got to be separate mailing completely. So you're talking about additional printing costs, paper, postage, and then one of the most significant is the collection rates. A lot of times with it going through the property tax bills, it's just lumped in with escrow. And you have in the county a phenomenal collection rate, well over 99%. All that was jeopardized. So first year, we just went out and killed it. The second year, we tried to work with the bill's author to get it revised so that we broke it out on the statement, included language that it's non-tax deductible, consult your tax advisor, et cetera, et cetera. He would come in, sit with us, talk with us for a couple hours, say, okay, I like what I'm hearing, let me go back and see what we can do, and then the next version of the bill was just completely ignored. So again, it didn't live anywhere in year 2. Year 3, Brett Harrell, the author, is a starting to get a little seniority, starting to get a few more people to join in with them, and Bill's got a few more sponsors. One of the provisions that they have finally came in on is that it can be at least in the same envelope. The CAB has told me that will increase the postage because they're kind of at the cap of the amount of paper they can get in that envelope. And then the next piece of paper will bump it up postage-wise. But, you know, we're talking a significant lower dollar amount than the other one. So we'll see how it goes. The good news is initially DeKalb was telling Dunwoody that if this law passes, we're not going to be able to do your stormwater billing anymore, which would have been significant because we have to ramp up our own internal stormwater billing function. I don't think that's the case anymore. So
Wouldn't streetlight also fall into that?
streetlight would fall under that, sanitation would fall under that, stormwater would fall into that, speed bumps would fall under that.
Do we as a council, I mean, I've seen other people put forth resolutions that are sensitive delegation. Do we want to include something that opposes that bill?
Our delegation knows that we're opposed to this. GMA is coming out and opposing it, and the lobbyists that I work with, everybody is vigorously opposing it. This actually, House Bill 122, is our number one legislative priority in Colonel. Just stopping this. So a lot of effort is going into that.
I think it doesn't hurt to send a message collectively from the mayor and council by resolution that we oppose this. So we'll work on that. Get that going.
So are you saying?
Get it on this too.
Yes, that's what I was just getting ready to look at Susan. So, yes.
And along those same lines, there's another one that is sort of going through, and that's the cell phone bill, that I'd like to do a resolution on that one also, because again, it takes away the power of the city from some standpoint.
We have one. We have the one that Sandy Springs done,
Yeah.
John Street's about to do.
Yeah.
We'll put it on this one too if you want us to, Tuesday.
For the public, can we just explain what that is on the cell?
Well, the cell phone tower bill is basically, the cell phone tower industry has gone in and they have gutted basically all the criteria that you get to use and make a determination as to whether or not cell phone towers are needed in a particular spot or not. I think.
Trying to think like a utility tower or something.
Well, you know, they don't have to show a need any. They've tried to take out the need assessment. They've tried to take out the ability for us to make them look for co-location.
Who's the legislator?
It's a gentleman from Marietta, I believe.
Parsons, not Parsons.
It's ATT, as my understanding, has a number of individual lobbyists down there trying to make this go through. And they seriously want it. And their construct on it is, well, the city still have to go through zoning. But what's problematic is that yes, you will still have to have a hearing, but you will have no ability to say no. And so basically your legislators would deem it that they can put cell towers basically where they want to, and you have to say yes to it. So while they make the decisions, they put you in front of the public. And I also talked to legislators about that also.
They can expand the base on the existing cell phones without permission. They don't have to address if the cell phone tower is no longer in use, they have to take it down. They don't have any restriction on the height of the tower, and it impedes our ability to secure our rates of income on it. It's really nullifying, and the purpose for it apparently is to not impede future development on a regional basis that could be stymied by individual townships or cities.
Oh, they're saying it's a cell phone towers are a regional issue, we shouldn't be provincial about
But
it.
they've taken away everything that heretofore has been part of the basis for individual municipalities.
Isn't that similar to, we heard this from Georgia Power on the debate over the substation that they put in, that basically they have the authority and whether the community or the citizens really had no vote on this per se, because the interest was if you want electricity, you've got to let Georgia Power put the substations where they need to go. Is this similar thinking?
I would say that's fairly disingenuous if that's their argument. I can give you a concrete example that occurred in Johns Creek. They needed more cell phone ban on Peachtree Industrial over in Gwinnett County and Duluth and Swanee in those two high traffic arteries. Gwinnett County has a more stringent rule than anybody else. Plus, the cost of locating on commercial property was much more. So they found under the comprehensive plan in Johns Creek, there is an area up in the northwest corner that's really more large estate, farm area that will ultimately be developed in smaller lots, but it'll probably be their highest end residential that they have in the city. There was an estate. The woman died. They got a cell phone site in the middle of a farm, and they tried to argue that there was a need because there were dropped calls for service over there, which was absolutely false. They had no needs for it in that area. They simply were going to use that area because it was a cheap site, easy to do, and less cumbersome for them in terms of getting the requisite permits than over in Gwinnett. So they were going to impose that on a very pastoral area that had no need for a tower. And those are the kinds of business decisions that they make, rather than some regional need for delivery services.
Okay. Is there any estimate on the prospects of that bill, or has it not come out of both committee, out of both the Senate and House committees?
Absent some Superman stunt, they're going to pass it through because AT&T has put a ton of money and a ton of people in there to try to make this get through.
My understanding is it passed the Senate and the House.
It's already passed the Senate?
It's in the House right now. So we're being advised to be sure to contact our legislator.
We'll work on these resolutions, and then at our Monday work session, we'll advise you where we are, because we plan on putting that on the agenda. Chris?
Yeah, the only other thing I'd bring us back on topic on is for the streetlight fees. What we're really looking at is covering our costs. That's what a user fee does. We're estimating our expenses around $400,000, so we're not talking about a big gap here. Residential's covered about $320,000. The fee to cover all our costs, maybe another $100,000 or so.
But do I understand that I read the Carving New Ground here, that most municipalities do not charge commercial for the streetlights, or they don't share in the cost?
I'm not aware either way on that. We could do some research to find out, but I'm just,
Talking to the cab transportation, it was a $2 or $3 million deficit for them to provide streetlights in commercial districts, and that was being subsidized by residential streetlights and general funds. So yeah, they had
People knew that.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
and that's really what
Push back on that.
And that's really what made me aware of it. Is just a sort of a general discussion with Patrice Keeter over transportation. Was, because we were talking about adding streetlights on Dresden, and she's like, I hate doing that because it just costs us money because we don't have any revenue. All of a sudden you just realize that all these, like all the pedestrian streetlights and things that you see in some of the commercial districts, the Acorn tops and all those are essentially free. The power that's running them is essentially free. So, and it's being subsidized by the residential or the general fund. We're still paying the power bill, but it's coming out of somewhere else.
yes, sir.
Question for you, Chris, on the revenue collections, with Cabot County collecting these property tax revenues for us, is there any charge to the cities for that? Has
Yes,
there been passed
there is a first year cost. It's roughly, I think it's exactly $51,000, which includes $25,000 to get all the programming and computers set up. Then there's an annual fee of $26,000 per year, and that covers the labor, the reporting, the billing, the mailings, everything. It's definitely more cost effective to do it that way. It's easier on the customers. They get one statement of the county that includes all their fees. They don't have a city bill and a county bill. And One area that DeKalb does amazingly well is on the tax commissioner and the collection side. 99.9% collection is what I've seen for Dunwoody. But even countywide, they have a very high collection rate.
Except for the business occupation tax.
Well,
That's not tax commission.
yeah.
On the property tax bills, the tax commissioner office does a great job. And it's not unique to Dunwoody. Countywide, they do an excellent job of collecting.
What, what taxes will the city collect, will be responsible for?
The business license tax, all alcohol licensing, any special permits such as massage, taxi, pawn shops, all those the city would do once there's a police department up and running. The hotel, motel, pretty much everything but your property taxes. The county would do the property tax for residential and businesses, which includes real property, personal property, and car tax.
The building structures and equipment, is that permit fees? The
Yes.
425?
That is correct. And again, that's an estimate. We don't have a lot to go on now because we don't know what development's coming down the line, but I hope, trust that that's a conservative estimate.
I know this is a very small item, but it's something that interests me, is the fingerprinting fee. Is that fingerprinting done through our police department?
That would be what our police department does, correct?
Is that for, is that done for like pistol licenses?
Well, I think that happens at the county level when they go to get their permit, so that it would seem kind of redundant to do it here and then turn around and do it there too. This would be for, a lot of times employers require fingerprinting and they can send them to the police department to give a copy of their fingerprints. This would be needed for some of the alcohol permitting rules and such as well.
Things like going to the county for any kind of fingerprinting, is that some kind of service we can transfer here?
It depends on what they're going for,
Like for a permit to carry?
and that's at county level, so that would still.
Is there a law that says that that's the case, or is there anything that stops us from saying you can do that here? You don't know that, get back to me.
I don't know that. I would say, even if you got it here, the county may still, you may take it to them, well, here's my fingerprints, and they may say, well, we're still gonna do it ourselves.
I think we can print them here, and they'll print them on your regular sheets, they'll sign them off, you take them from the judge.
Chris, does that
It's
5,000?
3 hours to go down to the cab and get your fingerprint for that. That's like $15 for it, something like that. You do that here. Look that up here.
Does that also include the charge that we're going to incur on fingerprinting up until our police come and while we're utilizing Dunwoody?
Well, currently the businesses have the option of going to the county or going to the Dunwoody. It's up to them. The customer coming in to either Dunwoody or the county would pay Dunwoody or the county directly, whatever their fee is. So that just the revenue in here and the expenses is not in here. They're both outside of our budget.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right, with that, let's skip over 2 pages to page 7 and look at the city council breakdown. You've got 3 basic items in here. One, you've got salaries, taxes, benefits, et cetera, related to personnel. You've got the professional liability coverage through GERMA to cover the professional liability for the elected officials, staff, et cetera.
Is that group insurance?
That's not the group insurance. That would be a few more lines down, the 42,000 number. That would be the GERMA line. And then you've got just basic operational expenses. And I want to talk just a little bit about the third one first. As you know, the charter provides $3,000 per council member allowance to, it's not, you don't get the whole $3,000 you go spend. You go incur expenses that you feel are reasonable and necessary to perform your job role, and you're allowed up to $3,000 for that purpose. The mayor is allowed up to $5,000 for that.
Which, you said line 3?
No, the third item I want to talk about,
Oh, okay.
not necessarily line 3. What I've done is try to estimate the best I can how I think you may spend that money. So for example, there's some education and training, there's some travel, there's some food, there's some small equipment. I really don't know how each of you are going to decide. One of you may say, I'm down at the Capitol a lot, I feel it's necessary that I have a telephone so that I can text or call various representatives and keep in touch with the rest of the council. Another one may say, I want a laptop. Another one may say, I want to do a quarterly mailer that updates the city on what's going on, whatever the case may be. But I've tried to come up with an estimate. And then in addition to that, we added some money for travel and training to the city's presence in the community, as well as get the necessary training that each council member would need. So that third item that I'm talking about, the allowance part is 17,000. If you add the 3 plus the 5 together, the total amount budgeted for those line items is 26.5. So there is an additional 9,500 in there above what you have more discretion over to get to that number.
I guess I'm not comfortable or don't fully understand why that number was increased substantially over what the charter says it should be on an annual basis.
And absolutely, and that's a policy decision that the council as a whole would have to make. But the rationale was, we'll just use one council member for example. 3,000 may not be enough to cover everything that the rest of the council wants you to do. They may say, Jim, we feel it's important that you go to GMA in addition to the newly elected officials training, in addition to we may want to get you a laptop, etc., to perform your responsibilities. 3,000 is not going to cover that, so we're going to do an additional amount of budget. The charter states, at a minimum, you have that 3,000. It doesn't say that's all you have. So again, you can come back and say, we're only going to do the 3,000 per council member plus 5,000 for the mayor, or you can bump it up based on whatever priorities and objectives you're trying to achieve.
At some point today, if we have the luxury, I think we need to look at it in this first year budget, which is already behind. I don't think we have that luxury, and if we have to skip something, so be it, or pay for it out of our salary versus our expense, so be it. I'm not comfortable increasing that number by, what is essentially 50% arbitrarily. And I understand why it happened. This first year, I don't think we need that in the city council budget.
Well, can I make a comment on that? And I was part of that discussion with Chris, and I agree with the thought and the notion of being conservative in the first year. However, there are certain expectations of every elected body, and especially on the municipal side with Georgia Municipal Association, Atlanta Regional Commission. There are some opportunities there, particularly for the mayor, to be involved in that by his participation and his presence and being invited to those committeeship levels comes back sometimes 4 and 5 and 10-fold to the city. So, and that also spreads out to council members. So my concern was that we were limiting the ability to have a very strong seat at the table, because these invitations don't come along every year. When there's an opportunity and it can be worked out that the mayor can be seated, or a council member, if the mayor says you'd rather have a certain council member seat there, I think it's appropriate to have those funds available. Now, that doesn't mean you have to spend it all, but when the opportunity is there, I think it's important. When we're looking at the Georgia Municipal Association Conference just by itself, that's an annual conference. It's an excellent way for you as elected officials to network with your brethren from across the state to share ideas or to find out how somebody's doing something in their particular city. It's also an excellent venue for training because they do offer training, and so then you have a place to be able to go to target your time and to get what I call first-class training. Secondly, because it's held in the summer following the recess of the General Assembly, there are multiple sessions. One, they have different committee levels, community development and others, that they review in depth all of the legislation that passed and start talking about legislative issues that are going to be in the horizon for the next session. I would hate for you all to miss that opportunity.
And I don't disagree. I think that's certainly well within the what I call the base central allowance, unless I'm missing something. Because, and also it seems like the majority of these opportunities are going to be local in the Atlanta metro area. So travel is limited to whether it's the mayor or council, travel is limited to the daytime events or those types of things. I mean, I think it's going to be a very rare opportunity, and I may be wrong, but again, in the first year, I'm not comfortable with that increase.
I'll speak to
the council
a little
budget.
bit to that. That's something that I frankly didn't realize were many things that you're expected to be, if you're especially a new city. There are conferences like the Linux conference. If you're not present, it hurts the city. I'm not saying there's a lot of things, places we need to go or travel. That's not. I agree with you. You want to be conservative. There are probably a couple things that might fall outside of the initial number that if we didn't go or I didn't go, it's going to hurt Brookhaven. And I never imagined that would be the case, but if you have opportunities for grants and there are connections you can make at these conferences, Brookhaven can be represented. $1 million grant that we could have gotten might not get there because you didn't have the representation. Right. But this Linksys conference is in Houston. The last thing I want to do is go to Houston for 3 or 4 days and leave my family here, leave my law practice. But I've been not just from Marine, from others, I've heard it. If I don't go, if we don't have somebody there, it's a detriment to the city. So I think I'm not sure if the number is a final number or something that we need to imagine, but I'm concerned that if we don't have presence at some of these important conferences, that it'll end up hurting the city, especially in the first year, because we do. And I've been going to stuff, but I went to the rubber chicken dinner the other night at Cab Chamber of Commerce, and frankly, it was important. It ended up being important because Georgia Power was there, and there was some opportunities to exhibit.
I guess what I would like to understand is, and I agree with the mayor, and I also agree with Jim. I'm now aware that we have required training as city council people, and I don't know exactly what the price tag is on that. And we will fulfill that training this year. I suspect we will not have to do all that training next year. So, I guess
There'll be training. There is a program that Georgia Municipal Association offers, certification levels, and some elected officials elect to fully participate in that to reach those certification levels. Is that mandatory? No, but does it help improve your leadership style and what you bring back to the city? Absolutely. For the first year, you do have mandatory training, and you're going to have that, the first Friday in March. GMA is going to provide that to you. But there's other training that occurs too, outside of the purview of the city council, but absolutely directly impacts you all. And the American Planning Association or Georgia Planning Association has training on planning and zoning initiatives. Well, you're going to be hearing rezoning cases. And when somebody comes in with a rezoning request and they have an innovative plan, it would be good that you understood what they're talking about. So you have that opportunity. The thrust of my wanting these funds in here for you all is I've heard each one of you individually and collectively talk about your drive for economic development and recruitment. And these funds would go principally to that, to be engaged in functions, training, or to be a committee member on select committees where you're going to be sitting elbow to elbow with the corporate captains of metro area Atlanta, or even outside, depending on, such as the link trip. This is a trip where mayors and major developers and CEOs of corporations go on to look at best practices in other parts of the country. And much of that time, the whole group is together. And it's a fantastic way to start networking, to talk about your particular city. We talk all the time, and I can't tell you the countless times that relationships have been built out of those meetings, whereby a CEO thinking they're wanting to locate a regional office somewhere and never would have given a thought to that individual city without saying, well, I've met you, come have lunch, and let the mayor invite them to lunch, and the next thing you know, they're talking about what we just heard in Alpharetta the other day, 400 jobs coming. So it's a supreme opportunity to have that available. And again, it's not to just go out and expend funds and travel and do all that, because just because you're going to another city is not a frolic, it's work. There's an expectation. So I wanted to have those funds in there, so if the opportunity presented itself, it was available for you to take advantage of, and to give you funding to support what each of you all said. Economic development, we're open for business, we really want to reach out. These funds also would cover membership to different venues, such as your Brookhaven Chamber. You need to have a seat at that table. You need to be a member of the Chamber. The city of Brookhaven does. So there are going to be other entities that might be of interest and might benefit the city as a whole, that having the funds available could allow you to make those critical decisions. And again, it doesn't mean because it's there you spend it all. So I would encourage you to at least think about that, to leave that in, because the mayor can't be everywhere, every day, all the time. And he's going to reach out to each of you to represent him on a committee, or represent him as the mayor who appoints them, sitting on a chamber board or some other board. So don't limit yourself to those opportunities of what you can bring back to the city. The other line item in the council's budget is professional services. And I'd like to see some funds placed there. We have $1,000 there now. As you know, we're working to identify a brokerage firm so that the city can move with speed to locate a new city hall, to be ready for a police department, to either decide if we're going to renew the courtroom space, or if we're going to lease a new space, and then ultimately even look at the idea of a permanent location where the city would own the dirt and the building. So we need funds there so that when the mayor is working to appoint and decide who that brokerage firm is, we need to have funds to support a contract that's going to follow. It might be an analysis that's done from the standpoint of space utilization. There might be a fee attached to that. When we go to a space that we have to finish out, or even if it's going to be designed, you're going to have architectural fees. We found that even with our own courtroom of, how many square feet is it, JD? 3,800 square feet. We had to have an architect, and we had to go into that space planning there. So I'd like to see that raised to at least $5,000 or $6,000, so that we can have those funds there available, that if a certain unique matter comes up, professional services funds are there to do it. And that doesn't happen outside the knowledge of the council, because when it comes to a contract and that has to be signed, the council's going to be made aware of it. That'll be on a consent agenda. I'm trying to look for ways to make you nimble in your first year. You have a lot of real estate activity ahead of you in a very short time, and we know that we're going to have professional services and to assist us in space utilization, contract portion, whether it's sharing the commission rate with the landlord, or they handle all of it. There's a multitude of things that we need to look at here. So I'd like to see those funds assigned and for you all to consider that.
Okay.
Maybe a suggested 5,000 or 6,000? Is there a number y'all would like to see next? In the division?
Well, realistically, I think $1,000 for the entire city council professional services is, that's one shot, one deal.
Yeah.
Any professional. I think that's low. So I mean, if there is an expectation for these expenses within this first year, I think we need to have it budgeted. And you have the best knowledge of what we should expect as a council
Right.
with 5 or 6.
I think that would be a very good start, and then, we'll make adjustments as we go through your next budget cycle, which is going to be this year too. And we'll have a better handle on the revenue streams, but JD, the architect was $1,500.
23.
Excuse me, $2,300. We wouldn't have had the money to do that.
Yeah.
And again, we're talking about some very unique space utilization and design that's going to be necessary for the police department, city hall.
It just seems to me, though, that this budget area seems to be, we're talking more about operational professional services. It just doesn't seem that the council budget, city council, is really the right place for an operational professional services.
Right, except for where it goes hand in hand to certain initiatives that you all might come up with. And again, I'm trying to reach out on what some of that could be, but definitely when we're looking at architectural services, but when we're looking at the brokerage services, we don't know what those are yet, other than our just most recent experience with the courtroom. And some of them, yes, would apply to the overall operations of the city, but the mayor may find that out of discussions and consultation with the council that when we're looking at the Beaufort Highland corridor, and we might want to come up with, because we've got the street line assessment now going, to come up with some different designs and what those light fixtures should look like. What, how do we come up with that, and where do we reach for those funds? Is it a community development function, or is it a matter of what the mayor and council are trying to determine, or is it an analysis of crime activity, permit activity, or lack of space utilization of we don't even know what's available to tell the development community that they could locate it. It might be some simple studies that are very short. I'm looking at short term, that a quick, somebody, can you do this, give us this analysis, and we have it within 30 days and it's shared with the council. So I wish I could be more exact on what those might be, but we're still so new, we can't really identify that.
I guess what I don't understand, and maybe it's a budgeting or how you classify line items. I'm kind of surprised that, I too don't want to have to say I need more than $3,000 in expenses, because everybody assumes that's me taking people out to lunch or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
But some of these other things, like the studies for streetlights or some other things like that, can we not have a line item that I would even suggest you could put either professional services or education as a separate line item outside of that expense amount. Keep us to our 3,000,
Right.
but have a separate line item that funds some of these initiatives that really could even be classified under community development or whatever.
One thing you can do, and to answer your question, yes, the particular example she gave is something that would fall under facilities, for example, which is part of the finance and admin balloon. But when it's in community development or finance and admin, the department has discretion to utilize those funds within their budget. If you include, say for example, council contingency, put $10,000 in for council contingency. This is money that you decide how it's going to be used, and something that comes up, such as a space assessment, you can say, well, I want to use $3,000 of the council contingency for this particular project. At that point, we can then amend the budget to take $3,000 out of the council contingency and put it into facilities, professional services. So I think what Marie is saying is we need to put some funds in here. This is a good place to temporarily park it until it's time to move it to where it will ultimately be used for, because we don't know what it will be used
But
for.
can you not basically have a line item that says, council expenses, 17,000, contingency,
Okay.
10,000?
I see what you're saying. The answer is unfortunately not. State law adopted back in 2002, I believe, a uniform chart of accounts. So all agencies, counties, cities, et cetera, have to conform to this uniform chart of accounts. Professional services will be this account number and it will include these items. Travel will be this account number and will include these items. And they gave you the buckets that you have. Unfortunately, they did not come up with a council expense line item. So that's why I had to arbitrarily guess where is it that I think this money is going to ultimately be used at. Now, we can move monies within these buckets. They don't have to stay, like, for example, travel doesn't have to stay 12.5. We can take, 2,000 out of training and put into travel because sometimes, training is a lot less than the travel to get you to and from there. But you do have to identify some sort of account. So unfortunately, we can't just have a bucket that does that. But we do track it internally.
I understand this, I mean, we have people using that,
Yeah.
one big bucket, like, figure out what was going on.
Right.
Makes
You don't want
sense.
to slush it.
Yeah, that's like-
I guess I'd look to the staff to come up with a number, and, let's look at the overall city council budget, fold some of that in. I mean, your 17,000 adds up to 18,000 to add all the individual items, but, that's a rounding error, but I'd like the staff to, give us some suggestions on how we mix and match these funds, so that we can take advantage of it. I understand the need. I just want to make sure that we're not, that we're only addressing the budget.
Okay.
And we all, and we, we all have this. What's good about the council is we're all of the same mind, that we're not going to be able to spend the rest of the day. And it's important that we be conservative and it's, clear to me we're all on the same page when thinking that. And so,
Well, I think we're
Yeah.
cognizant of the fact that some municipalities and public officials do abuse travel and junk things. Now, sometimes that's associated with lobbyists and whatever, but I feel certain that all of us would underwrite some of our own expenses if we needed to too. So, we want to be open and transparent, but we also don't want to hinder the city in terms of any kind of benefit we might gain with our being somewhere educated or
Exactly.
being at the table.
Right.
I think you make an excellent point.
Okay, we'll work on that.
Any other questions on the council budget? So
Oh, well,
next.
just one real quick, group insurance, how did you calculate that? Because we haven't been presented.
Yeah, it's an estimate. I don't know, just for everyone's benefit, the group insurance line would be health coverage for employees of the city, which includes the 5 of you. We don't know exactly what the premiums are going to end up being. We have some quotes, and we still need to work through that to bring an official recruiting package to you. But even using those quotes, we don't know if you're going to want family, you're going to want single, and you're going to want no coverage at all, and you're going to want just your spouse. We don't know what those are going to be, so I've just come up with a kind of a ballpark average of what I think it's going to be. And then once we go through open enrollment, decide if or if not you want coverage, and then at what levels, then we'll know the exact amount. And if we need to revise that number, we can do so.
And are you using a particular formula of what percentage the city would cover for each individual or family?
I'm using an estimate of what I think it's going to be on a per employee basis. And again, if you take family coverage, it's going to be a lot more than if you just have self-coverage.
But does the city pay all of that?
There will be a formula. That's one of the things. we
That's
have
what I'm
to-
asking
Yeah,
you.
we'll have to come to you and say, this is the cost of the benefits, and this based on our need to recruit quality workforce. This is what we're recommending the split be between the city and the county. I mean, the city and the employee. I will say that this is the one area that differs a lot from the private sector in that the salaries are usually lower than you get in the private sector, and the benefits are usually higher than you get in the private sector. So the city will most likely pay a significant portion of the total cost, with a smaller portion being paid by the employees.
And whether this formula is being applied to everybody, not
That's
just, you
correct.
couldn't say, well, we're only going to pay a little bit of council, but we're going to pay all the police.
Yeah, with one exception, typically when you execute your contract with the city manager, I've never seen a contract with a city manager that didn't include 100% paid by the city. Obviously, that's something you can negotiate, but I've never seen anything but that. So the market kind of dictates that your city manager contract will be paid 100%, but everybody else will be at a consistent level for all the employees. City manager, there is an estimate I have in here for salary based on the market rates for this area. There are provisions for the temporary services of Marie and JD in here, and then there are really your typical expenses that you see for professional development, membership dues that the city manager would be a member of, just various supplies and small equipment that this position will use. Obviously, the biggest portion of the cost here is going to be the salary and benefits for the salaried position and the cost for the temporary provision. So your first 6 lines there is where most of your costs are. Not a lot to talk about here, but if we have questions, we can dive a little bit further into those.
I guess I just would like to ask that we discuss those based on current situation. And I'll let you get with the mayor, city manager, and so we'll work through those so that we see a revised budget that's up to date.
What's the professional services? 133.
That would include the contract rates for the interim city manager, the interim deputy city manager, and there are some additional expenses even above that just for professional services once the city manager is on board. But the bulk of that cost is for interim staffing.
I wanted to mention too, on the dues and fees, especially the professional dues, that those memberships are to the city, not to the individual.
Okay.
So, I mean, the individual certainly takes advantage of that because that membership covers your city manager or later on when we get into the planning department and the other departments. But the membership application and the fees are paid in the name of the city so that when there's change, the city's membership does not lapse.
The dues for organizations like the Georgia Municipal Association and the CAB Municipal Association, are these reflected in these individual line items of dues, or is that going to be, see that somewhere
They
else?
are in dues, but the particular two that you identified, I have in legal, because those are more for like lobbyist type expenses. I mean, that's a bulk of what you pay GMA for, is to help lobby on behalf of the cities. So I put that expense in the legal budget.
Those two numbers are fairly large, is that right?
It is. Now, this budget doesn't include the DeKalb Municipal Association. It only includes the Georgia Municipal Association. My understanding, and I haven't seen anything in writing, is that they're not charging the city anything in 2013 that you would get welcomed with an invoice in 2014.
Are we required to belong to both?
No, you're not required to belong to
Okay.
either. That is something that council would decide to participate in or to opt out of. Historically, I've definitely seen some advantages of being in GMA, without doubt. The DeKalb Municipal Association is very new. This is first year it's been up and running, so there's no track record to say, yes, clearly we should be members because look at what they've done in the past. It's, you know, this is new. I think if you want to look for a track record, I think Gwinnett has a municipal association in their organization. You can reach out to some of the mayors in Gwinnett and see if it's justifiable, or talk to some of the mayors who have joined the Cabinet Association and see if they see benefit in it.
There's a lobbyist, I think, that the Cabinet Association has now, which is kind of, they've never had that before. So Mayor Clarkson and Mayor Davis both said it's something we should, we'll still look into it.
Yeah.
And how do they assess their dues? Is it a formula based on population?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, they take total operational costs and look at the citizen representation and pro rata allocate those expenses. So this year, not having Brookhaven in the membership, it's $1.25 per capita
For DeKalb?
for the DeKalb cities. So that would equate to 7-ish for you guys. So that's a big expense. And now, because of Brookhaven, the population has now doubled almost for cities, and you could reasonably expect that that number will be cut significantly. But still, compared to GMA, DMA will be a lot more.
And what is the cost of the GMA roughly?
I would have to go in here and look and see, but I'm thinking the 13, 15 range is what we've got in this budget. It too is per capita, but it's a much lower rate because you're spreading it out over the entire state.
And again, you put that, say, whatever it is, 13,000 in legal, or is that under the dues?
It's in legal, under the dues in legal.
Okay.
City clerk. Two significant line items here. One is the first 5 lines, which is your salary and benefits. The city clerk's budget does include a deputy clerk coming on board mid-year. So the salary figure that you see there is not for one person. It's basically 1.5 people. And a deputy clerk salary would be significantly less than the city clerk, obviously.
This contemplated as part-time.
And this is contemplated full-time, but only bringing the person on mid-year. The second line item there you see is the technical services. This 80,000 includes 2 elections. One for the runoff that happened last year, the other for the election that will happen this year in November. That's the city cost. Haven't seen the IGA. We don't have a true estimate. This is based on what I saw in the newspapers during the runoff time frame. Now, this is one area where if you had to rob Peter to pay Paul, you could postpone paying this. Let's say we needed another 20,000 to do X.
It's 2 years.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time, but I did include it in the budget, provided we have the opportunity to pay. I'm always one to like to pay my bills and be done with it. So if we need to find some money, we can pull from here, but for now it is included in the budget unless you tell me to take it out.
And so both the elections could be spread out, the 12 and 13 can be spread out over a 2-year period?
I would have to rely on Bill to tell me about ongoing costs, but I think that is my understanding that those expenses can be spread out. And I would even extend that to say even some of the other IGAs that we're discussing could potentially be.
Clearly, to the extent, the reason we're borrowing money, so we can push that clearly to the extent we can. I'd like to see those numbers pushed out in the later years. Taken out of this 13 budget and pushed into whatever year they can be, or extended to whatever term.
Just carried over a couple of budget cycles. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes. I mean, I'd carry out as far as they were required to pay for 2 years, and split it in half, and pay half this year, half next. If it's 3 or 4 or 5 years, then let's carry it out. We borrowed for equipment from GMA. It's the same concept, where since we're spreading out over payments over the term of the at least, so to speak.
Is that the consensus?
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I like your point of it, but, you know, this first year, I think it'd be, if it was a huge number, I'd say, let's not do that. But for something like that, it's,
So we're talking about $40,000, which could cover some overages.
right, exactly. It's not $500,000 that we're saying, we need to ignore for a year or two. And this isn't ignoring, it's just, I know the cap says we have 2 years to pay off the election. So,
Let's
why
take
not?
advantage
Why
of it,
not?
yeah.
Why not? Especially on the other days.
Yeah, but my why not answer is because I know there's going to be needs in 2014, 2015. You will never have enough money to do everything that needs to be done. So that's the why not. But I'm not arguing to leave it in there either. It's entirely your preference. So would you want to pull the entire 80 out? Is that the consensus?
Yes, that's my view, yeah, that's my.
I think we're going to be in a much better position this year to address that. Okay.
And, you know,
I'll take it out.
if our mid-year budget suggests that, you know, revenues are greater, then, you know, we put it back in mid-year, but right now, I think we need to pull it out.
Okay.
With the way we're structured now, though, we are going to be having elections almost
Yes.
every year, so this will be there'll be a recurring payment, not this amount. It'll be probably half of this, because I don't think it's dependent on how many candidates there are. We still have to work on the polling.
Well, you won't. I don't think you'll have any elections next year. If I'm not mistaken, there's no 14 elections.
Well, it would be polling places just in the districts that are on election, right? Yeah. So the cost for that should be nearly as much as for citywide.
That is correct.
So well, there are probably 4 or 5 polling places out of those 2 districts, maybe 6.
Yeah, I think maybe 6 because we have some weird
Right.
lines. We've got some split districts.
But again, I haven't seen the IGAs yet. We're talking 2 years.
Do any of the cities run their own elections? Is it possible?
It is possible. It would be more expensive because you would have to staff them and operate them. But yes, some cities do that.
That is the equipment they use now, those machines, it would take a lot of manpower to train people and keep up with those machines and everything. You're better off to use the county's machines
Absolutely.
and do it.
As I understand it, it's one of the things they do pretty well,
Yes.
Well,
unlike some other
we
counties.
tax them, you know, there have been some issues.
But not like,
No, not like full.
This really small, tiny cities can do it because they can still use paper ballots, and I've done it with paper ballots. But when you're as large as you are, you need those machines to use the cards and all that. Those are expensive, and it's hard to keep people trained to do.
Yeah, probably. Can we institute a purple finger die thing? What they do. We're doing tagline.
Let me ask one question, just like Bill and Chris. If we move in next year's legislative session, if the council wishes to move forward on creating a redevelopment authority, which has to be approved by referendum, then we would have
Generally speaking, though,
next year.
generally speaking, they probably will not charge us any money for one period of the election, except to the extent they may have to create, what they have to pay to create the ballot. Because they're running an election that year anyway.
Okay, all right.
which is adding one more line.
Okay.
Everything is discussed when you approach them, but I can tell you, we have that exact situation in Dunwoody. If they're already running an election and they don't have to produce any additional paper and put a dollar item on there, they do not charge us for that.
Okay, good, all right.
Doesn't mean they'll continue to do it that way, but it's working.
Chris, just one thing too, Bill just whispered to me, like on the Muni Code update, is that in here under professional services, or where is that?
There is some money in here for the Muni Code items, but not enough to do a codification.
Okay.
I didn't suspect that we would be ready for a codification in 2013.
Right, so we could look at that for next year's budget.
Exactly.
Along those same lines, where would our comp plan investment?
That's in our community development department budget.
All right. Finance admin.
You want to skip this thing?
This one is in
Yeah.
I will say,
You
your summary isn't just this one page in the letter here, the mayor address. The finance and administration also includes your IT and your PR, marketing communications division as well. So if you're comparing the letter to this, you'll see there's not a match, and that's why. But for the backup, the details that I was giving you, I wanted to make sure you saw them separately. Because, obviously, especially IT, for example, you've got a considerable amount of expense, and they don't want to just throw it all in one bucket.
And the city hall rent is in this too.
The city hall rent is in this line item. Court rent is not.
Is there money in here for, we talked about professional services, is there money in here for professional services and development of the city hall by year end?
No, there's nothing to address the relocation in the 2013 budget. That's one of the things that I wanted to mention, because when that time comes, we probably will need to look at a complete, fairly comprehensive budget adjustment. There's just simply a lot of stuff we don't know now. Where is it going to be? How much build out is going to be needed? What space is going to be required, et cetera. And something that big, it would just be premature to try to guess in February what you're going to be spending in October December for a project that big. And we will come back with a budget amendment recommendation when that time comes.
Just to give you an update, following the presentations that you all heard on the brokerage firms, the mayor is directing me to work with two of the firms to get their exact costs and anticipated costs. So I have that information, and I've gone through both of their proposals. I'm planning to share that with the mayor on Monday, so that we can take a look at what we expect, program management, the analysis, if there's a component for space utilization there, or do we want to go outside? There's architectural fees that are outside the scope of both of these proposals, and then it doesn't even include furniture or any kind of furnishings. So I've got a ballpark figure for both that I'll go over with the mayor, but it doesn't include all of the build out, if you will. I'm talking about beyond just the walls and that. We're looking at furnishings, a lot of things. So
Can you talk a little about that in Monday's
yes.
session?
So one good place to start with this particular section is what it includes. We've already hit on one. It includes facilities, so the rent for this building, any kind of repair, wiring, et cetera, that might need to be done at our expense would be in here. This building has a conference room downstairs, but if we utilize it for whatever reason, there's an additional expense. So those type items for facilities would fall in here. It also includes the finance director position, includes accounting, purchasing, human resources, the operations at the front window, so all your business licenses and occupation taxes, et cetera, fall into that as well. So it's not just what you would think of typically as finance. The large items that are in here, the biggest is the $1 million for the professional services for the contractor that's been selected. In addition to that, you've got the rent for this building at 282. Down at the bottom, you'll see there's $300,000 budgeted for machinery and equipment. This would be for software and equipment that's going to be used. Once the finance director is on board, they'll issue an RFP for an enterprise-wide solution for the finance and accounting system. Right now, we're using QuickBooks, which is by no means a permanent solution. From an internal control standpoint, there's a lot of holes in that, but it does take time to get a good solution in place. And I would be doing an injustice to the finance director if I did that on their behalf, because when they come in, they'll want to do their own thing.
Speaking to the finance director, what, we've had some other personnel issues that are more pressing. What is the time frame you think the personnel, the finance director needs to be on board? Next week or a month or?
I would say it's right up there with your police chief, just a little bit below. As soon as your city manager is identified, that person needs, the very first priority that person needs to be working on is surrounding themselves with their senior staff. So that would include your communications director, your meeting development director, your finance director, your police chief. This will be the team that implements all the policies that council sets out, and all of them are very important. So as soon as the city manager is identified, you need to start working on that, have that person start working on that piece. Now, there is a provision in the charter that gives council the ability to appoint that position directly. I don't think that would be the best solution. I think it really needs to be a city manager, and I would encourage you to have that appointment done at the city manager level. But it's kind of the difference between a finance director and a CFO, whereas a CFO reports directly to council, kind of looks at the citywide priorities, whereas a finance director is really managing the finance department itself. It doesn't come over to community development and say, you're not going to be able to do this big project. I think that needs to be a city manager role. But you can do it both ways. So to answer your question, you could do it yourself, do it before the city manager is appointed. I wouldn't recommend doing that.
So, Dunwoody, you report to?
I report to the city manager. And everywhere I've worked, it's always been that way, but most places, the finance director reports directly to the city manager and not to council. I have seen it done both ways, but that's not the norm.
Any thought on that, Bill?
That's the normal way in a city manager form of government. It's one of the administrative departments that the city manager manage.
The mechanical equipment, like with their IT, is that part of the, will that come out of the DMA lease, or will that be an expense in the budget?
This one here, I have not currently budgeted to come out of the lease, but that doesn't mean that we can't do it. And from a cash flow perspective, we may decide we need to do it that way. And when the time comes to actually acquire it, I've got 200,000 in there. It may come in at 200. You may want to say, let's just go ahead and spend it. It may come in at 400, and you say, well, let's finance it because we didn't anticipate spending that much money. But for now, I've got it as a cash out item, but that doesn't mean we have to do it that way.
Yeah, I'd like our city to look at, especially when we have things where we know it's a cost which we can amortize over years. I'd like us to look, in light of the fact that we've got first year significant low revenues, amortize those costs over.
Absolutely.
What that GMA lease was 3 years.
They will go as short as 3. They'll go the life of the asset.
Okay.
I know we did a fire truck once for a 10-year period.
Yeah, anything that we can amortize, let's take it out of the term and break those front-end costs down.
And the interest for the TAN is in here, not so much because it's a finance and administrative department function, but there's just nowhere else to really put that. And then the other thing I just want to point out, just to protect whoever that finance director ends up being, you do have a line item for $10,000 in food here. And I wanted to clarify, this is not some sort of expense allowance for the finance director. This is more for the facilities when there's a public meeting, a work session, et cetera. A lot of times you'll have a work session immediately preceding a council meeting. And at that point, food is brought in for the staff and the council to have a working and eating.
And that's pretty much the same for any of the food items in it.
I mean, there's food items spread throughout the
There
budget
is.
that
These
add
are
up
more
to
for the-
$30,000 to $40,000.
Yeah, these are more for the public meetings that involve boards and commissions and county but that's what these are in here for.
And I understand that it seems like there's a lot of, there could possibly be some overlap. There was, it says, council work session meals, 7,800, and then there's meals in the council, there's meals in the city manager, there's meals in community development. There seems to be a lot, and I just want to double check.
A lot of meals.
Well, there's a lot of dollars, but they all seem to be for the same thing, work sessions, council meetings, planning zone. Let's just make sure that there's not overlap spread throughout there that I understand why it's there. It just appears that there may be some overlap that
I believe, I have to go back and look at the numbers, but I believe what we did here were 24 council meetings. We estimated the number of participants that would be in those meetings, and then a head count. I can't remember if it was $8 per person to get to that figure that's it wouldn't include like planning and zoning review or anything like that.
Again, I understand why it's there. There seems to be, almost every category has something in there. Just want to double check to make sure that we're not over-counting. Double
For some reason, legal doesn't have any meals in it.
Okay, I finished.
It's not good to-
But like community development, they have a multitude of boards, and how they operate is, like an hour and a half before they have their hearing, they'll have a work session, so on the agenda all the time, so they'll be off that. Development Authority, I'll see them probably as a group that will be probably over the lunch hour. So capture those members that are on there because they'll be doing other things with their day.
Plus, I would hope, and I'll look to the chamber for this, that we can promote Brookhaven eateries, and while I'm not asking for donations, but I'd like to, put the offer out to them to, we're going to have these requirements.
Well, now the council, we're our meeting very day today.
Yeah, exactly, and also, just put together a list and let them sign up for several. Again, I'm not looking to them to donate, although if they want to give us a discount.
I'm anticipating.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
We can put a card on the front of,
Yeah.
so we get from today, sponsored by.
So next day, Gary today, he's happy.
For those sponsorships.
And not to get too much in the weeds, but what I did at Dunwoody is we actually sent out a request for quotes to the Dunwoody restaurants and said, we want to know meal, dessert, drink, delivery, and all the cutlery and stuff that goes with it. Send us a proposed menu and a price per person, everything tipped and all included, on what it would cost. And then we had that inventory from the vendors. We had about 12 or so that responded. And we just go through and pick from those. And sometimes it's Chewy's, and sometimes it's Carrabba's, but it's always a Dunwoody restaurant. And I would suggest we do the same thing with Brookhaven, provided temporarily they want to come this far for the delivery. But yes, we can do that.
Well, but perfect. I mean, I have no problem.
I want to give him a chance that we deliver charges and say, listen, who wants to provide food, and then we'll see if we like it, and you can charge.
I will say that Jason's Deli, the meal we had here at our first meeting that we had here, Jason's did donate that in hopes that we would call it back at some point in the near future.
And again, I think we need to take advantage of all those, but we also need to extend
Absolutely. And we will do so.
the advertising or promotion, put on the website.
Sponsored council meeting.
We'll add another column to our meeting list, meals sponsored by.
And we'll have thank you notes, we're rotating, you have that for a while.
Got no problem with that. But anyway.
The tax commissioner's billing fee, the $51,000 I mentioned, is in this particular department, which includes revenue, talk about business license, et cetera. So that's in here as well.
Where's that?
That is under, I believe, professional services. You see 71,000. 51 of that is for the tax commissioner, unless I've got my lines crossed up. It's either professional or technical.
One question, where in here
Technical.
is the admin, I guess that's up to the official admin services, the administrative assistant, it's her name?
Diane.
At what point can she start moving back to help in the manager?
That's entirely at the city manager's discretion.
Okay.
We've already been having those conversations.
We're delaying any additional expense as long as we can, realizing at some point she's gonna have to go back there and we'll have to address the reception.
What line is that in that?
That's on the big one, the one thing.
She's lovely at the front, but probably very helpful.
The other thing I think we haven't covered, but while we brought up administration, do we have somebody on staff at all times that's Spanish speaking?
My department does. That was part of the RFP that was released that it be required. Contrary to what the name sounds like, Mary Ann Parks is trilingual.
Okay.
Including Spanish.
But she's available if somebody at the front desk needs help, okay?
Absolutely.
What's the other one?
Is it Portuguese?
Is it Portuguese?
English, Portuguese, Spanish, and Italian.
Okay, there we go. Multilingual.
Wow.
Yeah, we can.
Keep her on board. Okay, that was, the question came up with Joe and I were met. So just want to make sure that there's somebody here that can answer any questions.
Absolutely. And obviously, I can't speak for all the contractors, but we did take every single provision of the RFP and make sure we addressed it.
Thank you.
Let me just clarify, did you say that IT is in this budget too?
IT is not this page, but on the cover letter. So if you look at the total, there's $2 million here, but in the cover letter, you'll see the finance and admin was 20.996.
Okay, that includes.
That includes IT and communications.
Before we move on to that, we take a 5-minute break. Just, and I don't mean to break the flow, but we're about to have, is that okay with y'all?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
All right, bye.
I don't miss it. Yeah, bye.
The figures that you have here for legal, obviously, are mostly for lawyers, professional services. I know Marie and Bill and I have looked at the figures and feel that those are reasonable numbers that will serve the city this year. There is some money available for potential litigation that may come up, as well as the retainer. For legal services, what's not included in here are the court-related items, such as the solicitor, public defender, etc. This is really more citywide.
Where is that budget?
Those would be in courts.
Okay.
What is the land acquisition number?
The land acquisition number is really more of a contingency of something we might have to address at some point. It's slow, as you'll see, but sometimes there may be a right-of-way or an easement that we may have to get, and sometimes there's some legal cost involved there. It is a relatively low number just because I don't know of something coming online, but I did want just a little bit of cushion in there. Legal bills can get away from it very quickly, so I didn't want to completely ignore that one.
So the lobbyist in here, is that the GMA bill?
That is just the GMA.
I'm sorry,
They're on the,
We're on page 11.
they're on the,
You're on the.
The budget.
back.
you're a judge, yeah.
The tiny bill.
The one I had, it showed itemized decision was carried out of the zero.
Yes, because I did not include anything for that.
Oh, okay.
So it would be 6,000 that you anticipated. I didn't put any expense in there to pay in this first year.
Bill sent to us. It's probably copy.
Good with legal?
Yes.
Okay. IT. Two bulky items that you'll see that sticks out to you right away. One is for the contracted services with internet, with the selected vendor. And then you've got some machinery and equipment split between two items there at the bottom. This was the estimated startup cost that we have. As you know, you approved 512 of this to start spending. But this is the total estimate they've given us for the city hall startup cost.
Yeah, okay, that was to be in the lease, is that lease revenue reflected?
Well, that was the $1 million I said back at the beginning that's not in the revenues right now that needs to go in there,
Okay.
along with the real estate taxes coming down $1 million.
Okay.
So it will be, it's not
Okay.
current.
Do we have any idea where they are on this, like on the small equipment budget?
I know finance is tracking the costs, and we're able to provide a report, so the answer to your question is yes, we do know. What that number is, I couldn't tell you. I have to pull those records and look at it, but we are keeping up with it.
Every invoice that's coming across, I've had IT mark it that this is part of the blanket 512,
Okay.
so that way it's being tracked, and Mavis has been real good to be sure that before she receives it, IT is putting that on there, so.
At what point will we begin getting regular reports that show actual versus projected? And I understand we're going through the budget process and trying to establish the projected, but at what point do you start seeing?
It's my goal and expectation that we'll give you a report through February 28th. And you should get that in the month of March.
Okay. And then after that, it'll be a monthly?
That's correct.
Okay.
Now, we can either formally present that to council as a work session item, or I can just distribute it via email. That's entirely up to you, but you will start getting regular.
We send via email that if it needs to be a work council, we'll put it on board.
Yeah. Put it on the session, and then we need to address it, or if we have questions, but yeah, send out as an email, let's look at it, and then put it in tonight, and then put it on there.
Just a quick question, the communications, that's mostly cell phones?
Communications would be that should include landlines and cell phones, but just for that department, I think they're spread citywide, if I'm not mistaken, but I can double check and make sure.
Who gets a cell phone?
Yeah, you showed 60 cell phones.
Yeah, that's what I'm
4,200 though, that seems, 60 cell phones would be more than 4,200.
Yeah, I
asking.
see
Cost per unit, 60.
a number of units.
Well, they have some.
Well, I mean, what is the policy? I mean, does everybody get one, no matter if they're in or out of the office?
It is a decision between IT and the city manager's office who needs a cell phone. Obviously, if someone's on call 24/7, they should have one. They tried to give me one, I give it back to them. So I don't know.
I mean, if you have a rotating on call, then there should be one cell phone,
One cell phone.
position that's passed
Yeah.
person to person.
I will say it's not just arbitrarily given to every person on site. There is a review and approval process.
I see GIS fees, but I don't see anybody for GIS. Is that covered somewhere else, like our agreement for aerial photography and those types of things? Is that, where is that? Is that IT or is that another department?
Community development.
We just entered into that intergovernmental agreement with multiple cities for that aerial imagery.
I mean, what gives it
The
12?
aerial imagery, I think that's in community development.
What about building the map? Is that IT or is that community development? Building the database of GIS information?
I thought that was part of the
county,
contract.
right. It is, but also we've got parcel maps from the county at no charge. We're finalizing a data sharing agreement right now with the county on that. So a lot of our base mapping is coming from the county. Now, when we get this aerial imagery flyover is this month, or it's probably already completed, but we'll have that, and that will become our base mapping. And so what you'll see is InterDev, or the IT department with community development, working on setting up those layers now. But our base is from the county, and it'll be improved upon the aerial imagery.
I'd just like to make sure that we have enough dollars in here somewhere to pull all that together so that we have a competent GIS base fairly soon, and so that and also so that we can roll it out so that people have access to it. Not just here, but also outside.
Yeah, along those lines, is there some entity we can transmit our actual city boundaries? So when people go on Google and they buy a map, they can see the boundaries of Brookhaven, or the little star of Brookhaven, and that's one thing kind of interesting, because you go on Google right now and you see 4 or 5 different maps that have nothing to do with anything, like what the city boundaries are. Is there some official, we know? that-
Well, they'll be probably tracked off of our own website when we, put them out. As soon as we have the aerial imagery, we'll find out boundaries.
Is there some federal service where you, there's not?
Now, what happens is that staff will start trying to push those kinds of things out. They'll try to get Rand McNally to pick them up.
Okay.
Who
does that?
Within in the city, probably this city it's probably going to be communications, or it's going to be GIS, one of the two of them. But it's an informal process that's inarticulate at best, but you continue to try to push it out. That's what every city's done.
So, yeah, I don't want to get a situation like Chamblee. I mean, when they annexed that portion of North Chamblee a few years ago, you were still getting maps this year that didn't have that boundary change on it. And I want
Well, a lot of that is, for the annexation law and how all that works, but, when a city annexes, they have to transmit that boundary survey, the legal description to the county. They are the agency that does the tax bill. So I know that in Fulton County, that had to be done, and it was Fulton County's responsibility then to update the corporate limits map. I mean, from the standpoint of who is the ultimate keeper, it would be them, because they're the tax agency. So but then of course each city keeps up with it themselves as well, because that's what they're going to track too, to be sure when the digest comes in, all properties are accounted for.
Is it the same thing, I think you and I talked about, somebody had asked if when you renew their driver's license, they tried to get a Brookhaven version, and it wouldn't come up on the computer, so, is that just something we need to call over there and try to?
It is a constant battle, and it becomes a branding battle almost.
Right.
Is part of it, but you end up taking it on one issue at a time. In Johns Creek, I took it on first over at the driver's license bureau because I wanted to have my driver's license. They didn't have it in the database, but we got it in the database, and I got my driver's license. It's always a battle to get yourself branded and where you are everywhere. But GIS can help you out, man. You get on Rand McNally, you're just going to start getting on. You get on Google Maps, you're going to be getting there.
Google still has most of land.
How do we accelerate that?
Yeah. Just gotta get somebody on
I
it.
think communications department is probably that's an accurate way to use it.
Well,
I
does
think it's part
IT
of
not
the-
deal with like search engine optimization and
Yeah.
things like that?
That's what you're talking about, those firms, a whole lot.
I know, that's what my daughter does. Optimization.
And Jay,
I'm not exactly sure.
Didn't we clarify borders with North Precinct for control purposes?
Yes.
I mean definitively. So there's no more question about what side of the sidewalk the border is, et cetera. So, I mean, from a city standpoint, shouldn't we be able to disseminate that information definitively and make sure that we're consistent?
And I think it's part of our communication strategy, overall city marketing branding efforts is I would love the TomTom GPS to be able to say, I'll be in Brookhaven, Georgia next year, but that's going to take effort to get those businesses online.
Well, the other thing too is then you have the whole effort of working through the post office, because they are the agency that defines and dictates from a geographical basis tied to zip code.
Right.
And I know Johns Creek had a lot of problems with that. Milton did too,
They
San
agree.
Springs, everybody did, because it's the post office that dictates if you have a certain street address, and it's this, well, actually, if it's this zip code, then it's this city, they do that.
Yeah.
And to get them to change, because, going through post office, and I think even Johns Creek had to go through their congressman, Tom Price.
I think there's still about 90 houses that come out of one Swanee post office that
Yeah.
still have not been able to put Johns Creek on their addresses. But generally speaking, what it has to do is you have to get the post office to Well, then, you can put Brookhaven, but right now, you're relying on just the zip code. What you want to do is you want to have it where it either reads Atlanta or Brookhaven on their meter.
Either one, because residents still have the option of using Atlanta. So you don't want to close them.
But because you're not going to change Atlanta off, it's just getting them to get the reader or commute both.
And with that brings us to communications. Two big items here. Obviously, one is the actual contract itself. And I know there's some discussion about whether to leave it as contracted or bring it on. This obviously reflects the contracted level. If we bring it on, it will typically be less. And we can do a budget amendment once that decision is officially made to reallocate that from the office, from the official administrative services to the salary line items. The other big dollar item on here is $50,000 for the creation and setup of a website. Right now, we've got a temporary fix. I'll say my personal preference is that we'll push that into another year, but I know that council wants to get that out there fast, and therefore it's in here currently. The other line items is a lot of your basic get out the news type expenses. So you've got some advertising, some printing and binding, and then some supplies costs of doing some rent items as well.
So we'll get a report from every department.
Yes. You'll have a report that looks very much like this, except you'll have the actuals in there with the budget.
But then just ballpark here, if we did a mailer to the entire city, that'd run about $5 grand.
Yeah, I don't think that's what you're talking about here. I think you're talking about very select pieces. You've got another team or citywide. For that, you want to take advantage of the electronic world.
If I could just mention, just to keep this in the back of your mind too, Chris is right, there are some changes that are occurring to communications, and hopefully by your March 12th decision day, you will have those final numbers. And I think it's going to be a combination thereof that you're going to have outside vendor, in-house assistance, and some dedication there of both. And then even the website for technical services, I think we'll have that even better identified. In fact, I know it will. So you'll be looking at some better numbers. Yes. Well, and there might be some leftover numbers there too that could be assigned somewhere else, or could be left there as a contingency if we need, depending on these other items further down on the list that we boost.
The next line is same as what she said here on municipal court. You're looking at the same thing. There are some additional things we know now that we didn't know a month ago. These numbers will change. One is a mistake that I made. I didn't pay rent. And we kind of need to pay that. So it's roughly $5,000 a month. So we'll go back. I know how it happened. I didn't have the lease. I asked for it. I continued to work thinking I would go back and put it in once I got the data, and it just never made it back in there. But end of the day, I messed up on that one, and the rent for the courthouse did not get included. Secondly is we had some original numbers for court. We reduced it based on what we thought was going to be a reasonable number, and then we ended up needing to come back to that $200,000 for the build out the software, et cetera, for the court. It's going to need to increase that a little, mainly to include some funds so that we can have off-duty officers run security oversight of the court operations until we get our police department up and running. So the next court budget you see will have some other expenses in here. You'll see that number that's currently 574. You'll definitely see that number go up to include those additional costs.
So about the 60 for the rent, and then about how much more?
60 for rent, probably another 5,000 for build out. If we end up being around 202.
Yeah, no, not build out for security.
So That included build out, security, software.
Yeah, 202 was build out, professional services, lumped in all the stuff that has to do with like internet service, yearly internet service.
That
Wait,
included security also.
Yeah, we came back and ready to talk about some additional security that we're going to need, considering we don't have a police department that is right across the street.
Which is going to go up. So
Yeah, it's going to go up. I'm not talking catastrophic numbers, but we're going to be in the sixes rather than the fives.
Yeah, just on that note too, we're planning for the worst, but we are interviewing all the Dunwoody bailiffs on Tuesday, and we'll be trying to get additional bailiffs that can provide court security for free, volunteers.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Security is a very loose term when you talk about
They got
They're
great
nice,
shows.
They are wonderful guys, and they do a good job of corralling and orchestrating where everybody needs to go, et cetera.
That's something that they've grown up there, right? I mean, is that something we should look at
Yes.
down the road?
It'll save us at least one full-time employee over there during court sessions.
And they love doing it. They're
Oh, I
really
know.
hard.
Either retired police, military, or something like that.
We've actually had three offers already from actual current law enforcement police officers that are willing to volunteer at the court.
Right. Hang on a minute.
What about the cost of the solicitor?
Yeah, the second line item there, professional services, that 90,000 includes the solicitor, includes some money for a public defender as it's needed, and I think the judges are in there as well. So that includes money for all those three.
What is the pay for judge per session? Is that
per session.
I think Jim may have that.
It's 350.
Yeah, 350 a session.
Yeah.
Gotta make this page.
Just a little bit bigger.
Yeah, that whole thing, I mean, as I looked at
Boy, fly over there.
Marie will tell you those were my scribble sheets, for lack of a better word. I really didn't want those to go
But he
out.
did concede.
I like having these.
Yes,
I know
You
it's
really
very
don't want us
useful
to read it,
information, but
no.
it wasn't to the quality that I'd like. I apologize for that, but it wasn't meant for outside hours.
I'd like to continue that. I mean, any future budgets, we put it back up.
If you look at it and make it even smaller.
We're going to have to
We'll
work
get
this
bigger
into some,
glass.
yes. That'd be fun, Glennis.
Okay.
All right, I have
Public Works is divided into two different items. You've got the administrative side, and then you've got the actual get out and fix it side. So first is the 4100 department on page 15. This includes the professional services contract to Lowe. That figure includes the laser, the vehicles, et cetera. It's not just the staff, but the laser truck figures in there as well. The electricity we talked about back when we talked about revenues. This 400,000 is total cost. So that's residential streetlights, commercial streetlights, and traffic signals, of which only 320 is currently being brought back in from residential customers. The other big dollar item is the very last line item, the small equipment, 50,000. This was for their work order software. They'll do an RFP, select a software provider to bring in at a later date.
Just, if I can, excuse me, Chris, on the professional services for Lowe, the 705, Chris said that this includes not only their contract for professional staff, but also the laser truck and of the 705, 598,000 is the task order for your staff, for your public works director. It's 4 or 5 members of the staff. I will mention too that in your next year's budget, you're going to see a difference in this line because we'll be bringing on the stormwater utility, which will then show, revenue side. But there's a person that's in here right now, one of the engineers that is only part-time. And that position will move to a full-time component in January.
So the difference between the 875 is our some of the services.
Right, the laser truck that you're getting, and there was one other,
There's vehicles.
yeah, vehicles, right, the trucks, a couple of trucks.
Yeah.
So where's like roadworks in this?
Okay, that would be your next page.
Uh,
And if I can flip on over to that one.
I'm
Roadworks.
sorry, going back to the 400,000 we have for budget for electricity.
Yes.
You know, the previous discussion, is that number going to change?
No, this is total expense. We're paying
That's all the
right.
traffic signals, all the commercial streets, all the commercial lighting, and then your residential.
Okay.
There's like 300,000, 320, that's revenue that's coming in, so you can see it's already going to be subsidized, so we're moving faster.
Alright, so what you've got for the repairs and maintenance on the roads is really the emergency potholes that just simply can't wait. We'll start a nice paving project which will include some major pothole repairs, like big strips of roads, as well as actually repaving the streets, as possibly as early as this year, depending on how the host discussions goes, but more likely next year. You'll start seeing, once all the revenues are coming in, once you're fully up and running, you'll start seeing paving with next year's budget. But this includes just some more of your items that just simply can't wait, things that we would be negligent and not fixing sooner.
Just a quick point too on that, just a further explanation. Once the laser truck has completed their task over the next 2 weeks, we'll have conditions of all the assets. That's going to give us a first step in the repair and maintenance program, which is part of this. But it's also going to be a major component to your capital improvement plan, because as we bring on the stormwater utility, where we need to see improvements there, it's going to affect perhaps sections of road. So we'll have a combined project, cleaning out the storm drains or extending a pipe, and then maybe repair and improvement of the road or a catch basin, or even to add one. So you'll see these are the very first components of what's going to build into a full capital improvement program. So it's a pretty exciting thing, because it's going to be a great tool for budgeting.
And another reason, there's a couple reasons why that's really important. One, you really don't want your road paving and servicing to become a political process. You want it driven by needs. And then two, you want it to go hand in hand so that we don't go in and pave a road, and then 2 months later, stormwater is digging it up to do a major improvement there and having to repave it again. So you want to have all the data in first and then deliberately decide here's what we're going to build out.
You know, repair and maintenance, roadway maintenance, I saw some guys out there on the other day, doing cleaning up the sidewalk in front of Montgomery, down in Montgomery. How much of that repair and maintenance is actually, if you have a really bad sidewalk that's roots coming up and it's a big crack, would they repair something like that? I'm not talking about repairing the sidewalk, but if there's some kind of, if that's in the right of way, obviously, is that something they'll take on?
It's something that they're able to take on. Now, whether it's done or not would be in discussions with the public works director and looking at the needs and conditions.
And that's what Chris was talking about just a minute ago, about like setting priorities, so it doesn't become politically motivated. Where there are, supreme conditions for public safety, we're going to have to take a look at those, and your public works director will start ranking those, which will then be a big tool for finance on how those get budgeted over the course of the year.
And the laser truck just does the streets. Is there a separate assessment that we would be doing sidewalks and traffic?
Oh, yes.
By the way,
Yes, we're going to do that. And we have some of that already part of that is coming from DeKalb County, not that total level of detail, but for the stormwater utility side, the catch basins, which are part of a sidewalk system. So, we're going to.
got some collapse.
Correct, and we have, what the county has promised is an inventory of all the assets for stormwater that they've
They actually
done.
put a camera through.
Yes, some of them they have, others they've not, because the second component to that is a conditions assessment. And I just had a conversation with Richard about that, I guess it was late last week. And he's fairly confident that it's a pretty thorough asset of conditions. Our Richard, right now. We may have to go back out and do a more thorough inspection. And that's going to happen anyway when we start targeting improvements. The good thing that he's doing too now is they are going out when there's a call, complaint, or concern. They're ascertaining very quickly now, is this a stormwater utility matter? Is this a public works matter with roads and sidewalks? So that we'll know in the near future how we're going to start funding those costs for improvements. So we have gotten some limited information from the county on the conditions of the assets by way of the sidewalks, but not in its entirety, just where it's related back to stormwater. So there are some missing links that Public Works will have to go back in. But I will say, getting the assets, inventory of assets, and the conditions of those assets have gone to probably 75% of our cost on looking at a stormwater utility plan to offset that for us.
And how soon will we bring on stormwater?
We're working on that right now. The plan is to be a full complement January 1. We'll be notifying the county, and that's a Chris question, before they determine what that amount is on the tax bill, because we need to tell them we're taking it over. So conversations that I've had with Richard is that we're going to gear up late summer so that we have our stormwater utility plan written. And this person that's part-time right now with the city, we believe he'll be able to do that under the current contract. There might be some tweaking, but all of that will be in place with a capital improvement plan for area maintenance plus capital improvement ready to go in January, which finance will be able to factor in for your budget hearings later this fall.
I just found out, I think some of you were at the PCID meeting where we heard that this big project, streetscape project going on at Lake Hearn is also a complete repaving of all the roads in the PCID, which I thought was grand because those roads really are in terrible shape, and that's going to be repaving that we don't have to do.
But ultimately, a lot of benches.
Well, they are putting in lots of lights, and we're going to talk to them about that.
All right, so is the comprehensive sidewalk and bike path, is that all part of the comp plan?
That will be a component in the comprehensive plan, but with a lot of input from Public Works.
Sure.
Because once we include that, not only what's current, but what we want to expand on, Public Works is going to have to account for that on how they manage it, maintain it.
I'll add you specifically, at some point in the very near future, next couple of years, you'll actually do a transportation plan, which will talk trails, bike lanes, sidewalks, roads, all of that. That's in addition to the comp plan.
And a lot of what's going to be driven is going to be the grant based.
Yes.
So you get it in fits and starts. You'll find grants maybe that you can do intersection improvements, and that's when we'll go take pieces of intersections, and you maybe go run 11 intersections down a thoroughfare, and you do timing improvements and decel lanes and all of that, because that was the grant for this year. But that's how a lot of your sidewalk kind of work is going to be happening based on where you can get grant money, and just use that as best you can.
And I said, appreciate that they are putting potholes in place, but at what point are we going to get prioritizing potholes, and at what point are we going to try to stretch that budget as far as we can?
The laser truck data collection is key to all of that, because we'll have conditions of assets, and then priorities can be.
So they'll cross-reference, if somebody sends them a sequence fix, or
Yes.
cross-references what they see on the laser, and be able to.
Correct. And a lot of that is going to be shared with you all. So one, you know where the money's being spent, where the highest priorities are from a safety standpoint. So you'll be involved in understanding that whole process of how Public Works makes those determinations.
Okay.
Parks.
Marie, can you just refresh my memory what the fee was for the laser truck?
It was 50,000.
I think it's exactly.
Yeah.
I think you guys use for like 4 or 5 days, it does that?
2 weeks. And they start Monday, starting Monday.
Do you get the book with that?
Excuse
Did
me?
you get the book with
Yes,
I mean,
the Brookhaven, yes.
is that-
Yes, yes. We talked with Richard and he said that was already done.
Unfortunately, the distinction they had is a lot different. It's almost a bench on it.
It is, I know, yeah.
There's seating on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, there has to be.
Right.
I'm not gonna ride.
Because it looks, I would imagine there's technicians in there. that
Well,
are-
there's equipment out there.
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, there's computers. It's like a SWAT truck.
I told them that we really need to have a marching band and majorette down the streets.
All right, the next line item is probably the one we know the most about because it's been discussed a lot. I firmly support the direction that the council is looking at right now, being deliberate, methodical in doing this. And I think you're on the right path. I know it might not be the easiest or most popular thing to do, but I think the decision to do this late fall is a good one. The line items that you've got here, the first two are the larger ones. The professional services would be to actually have staff prepare a parks master plan. Now, staff would be independent of public input, obviously, but you have a firm come in and assist staff, public comment, et cetera, to develop a parks master plan. The budget also includes bringing on your parks manager or parks director or whatever the title ends up being for half a year to complete that work, or at least get substantially through it, so that once we take over the parks, we're not in this limbo stage where we're having to take care of something before we even have any abilities to do so. What you have here are estimated expenses of what we incur for a month or month and a half, 2 months to handle just very routine basic maintenance, tree limbs, removal, gravel, etc. And then the utility expenses that go with that. There's an unknown factor here. We don't know a lot. We don't know as much as we need to know about the buildings and structures and everything that are on there. And part of the master plan will be to help address that. So there may be some tweaking to this once that manager or director gets on board. But this is what we have to do, kind of as the starting point to work with on that.
I know that there's rumblings about the county county's position that the city of Brookhaven may be responsible for maintenance of parks this year. Do you have any update? I mean, if they hold that position, which imply that the city of Brookhaven is not somehow paid for the parks already, how would that factor into our budgeting if they were to do something like that? What's the numbers?
Well, they're telling us a number of things, and I wanted to share a lot of this for Monday's work session, just to give you an update on that. But there are some choices that you have that can be very proactive. I'll share with you. They have come up with a cost, and the majority of the money, it's over $700,000 for 11 months that they would want to charge the city to include repair and maintenance, and to provide lifeguards and summer camp and some programming that goes on in the community center. There is a debate as to whether or not the city is really required to pay that when all citizens of Brookhaven are county residents. And so there's been a lot of conversation, and we had conversation on that just this past Wednesday when we had our IGA meeting. But I think I had a conversation with the mayor on one of the approaches we want to make. I'm bringing it to you all on Monday. Yeah, they're saying that originally when we told them we were waiting till the fall, they said, well, they haven't hired anybody or they haven't done anything, but they've obligated all of your parks, your fields to private nonprofit groups that have already programmed the field. So what the county is asking you to do is, in that cost of over $700,000, is to maintain and repair those fields that others are using, where there's no differentiation made as to whether or not it's a Brookhaven resident, even a county resident, or a North Georgia resident, because the county does not have a gate fee. Anybody that wants to recreate, sign up, they let them.
Yeah.
And they have told us at that last meeting that from the revenues they collect on user fees, they subsidize that by 90%. I think that's what Ted told us. So they are running in the hole terribly. But I'll give you all the details on
What
the
was
good, the bad, the
Dunwoody?
ugly.
Did Dunwoody have the same issue?
Well, there was a couple things there. One, they didn't want to give us the parks.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if they didn't want to give us the parks or they were just using that for leverage, but for whatever reason, they were refusing to give us the parks. We had to go through the state legislature to get the parks. Secondly, the Dunwoody parks do not have recreation programs organized at the government level. There's a lot of nonprofits that have programs that go on, the Nature Center, for example, but Dunwoody doesn't subsidize that. Really, we were just talking about the land costs and the actual maintenance, which is why Dunwoody's park budget for maintenance is so much lower.
But, you know, the numbers that are asked, the questions don't match the numbers that private corporations as far as what they spend on our city. But I mean, it's, what they can talk about more than the figure they're talking about, I mean, we have 3 pools, and we have two well, 1 really. We have 2, yeah, Broward's next morning, no one's got a lot more going on with the gym. And staff there, so they get knowledge. You're talking probably about 15, 20 lifeguards, part-time someone. $700,000 is, that's a lot of money to pay for that kind of stuff, for trash pickup, so, I don't want to get into negotiations.
So we'll definitely keep an eye on that one too.
I just had a question on the official admin services. Is that an estimation, we haven't let that bid yet, is that a?
Yeah, part that was bid out, Parks and Rec was part of our RFP. Now, contract is not been awarded.
Right.
But we do have some costs in those proposals that we're able to estimate.
Well, that's what I was asking. If we, I know we have 2 bidders, and I think you should just take an average of those 2 and let that go.
I believe we took the recommended firms bid here just for budget purposes.
And we haven't really talked about whether the parks director would be, I think in the bid, it was under the contract.
Correct. And we're talking about that or another way to do it.
Okay. So nothing's resolved on that.
No, but, and Chris and I went over that when he was preparing the budget, so it could go either way. The funds are there,
Yeah.
so it's how you want to
Your
designate.
contracted services will almost always have a higher cost because you do have the back office support, the profit part of that component. So the $80,000 we brought on a Parks Director in-house, you'd have some savings there and you forfeit that back office support to get that savings. So this is kind of the high watermark that it would cost with contract versus employee.
I'd like to ask a question. As the Cat County residents, we're paying for parks. Right now, we're paying for potentially the lifeguards that come on board, the trash pickup and the maintenance. So if we're being asked to pick up the expense to maintain the parks, isn't there a corresponding tax that's being paid to reimburse us?
Like you were paying it in 2012 as the unincorporated area. The parks is part of the special district tax.
Right, which has dropped
Yeah.
for this
So
year.
that would go down for city residents, and now those costs to Brookhaven parks is what they're proposing that we pay for correctly. So,
We have asked them at the last meeting this week, of that amount, what is the direct cost to a Brookhaven resident? And they said, we don't
yeah.
budget it that
They
way.
don't budget that way.
So, well, that's, and Chris brought up, well, that's what the charter says, that you have to, whatever the direct costs are. And there were some comments made by the labor team that was there too, so it's.
As well as revenues too. Revenues were not allocated by the park
No.
either, and IGA did not offset the cost to the city by any revenues that were being received. So they're going to go back and look at that as well to determine how much the IGA should be based on revenues that weren't currently anticipated in there. So that's still ongoing. We'll cross that bridge soon enough. All right, last item is community development. We have $100,000 to do a substantial portion of the comp plan. That may be enough to do it all, it might not. We'll see when the proposals come in, but $100,000 will at least get us through the 2013.
Yeah, that's something we're possibly expanding.
Yes.
And it will be. We'll see when the proposals come in, what their timeline is, what the cost is, et cetera. But for now, we've got that amount in there. And then you'll also see there's some salary and benefit line items here for a community development director. Other than that, the only real significant costs that you've got are the contracted services for Clark Patterson Lane.
The educational training, does that go to our boards too?
That is, there was one board in particular that we did budget some monies for. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it was planning. Was it CBA?
I'm sorry, the training,
Yes.
planning, CPA, construction board of appeals.
We didn't have training for all of those. There was.
No, just
I
for
think there was-
CPA and planning,
Okay.
planning commission.
Some of that's done on Saturday.
Like with the food, we have printing and copy costs, bread. Is there any way we can track that, or we just assuming that we're going to take the citywide cost of that and allocate it by department, or how does that?
Well, printing and binding would be department specific.
But we've got two credits that have no.
And those costs aren't what we're talking about here. We're talking about like business cards, envelopes, those sort of things that we have to have an outside company do. The copier maintenance contracts are ran through the facilities department, and that would be citywide. They all go in there. And then copy paper, most of the time, we'll run all of them just in purchasing department. The cost will be in there. Sometimes there may be special paper needed, department may order that special type of paper.
For instance, I mean, I've asked for certain forms, about put off 3 or 4 copies of it and hand it to me. On one hand, you think that would be a pre-printed form, but also, I know that it's better having it online, but, it seems like costs like that, and again, I know we're talking about pennies, we're talking about 2 versus 1 pencil, but I'm just curious, as we've allocated it, I know we have, and it's all been confirmed, but you have a job code or a department code or something like that. I mean, and again, I don't know that we need to get to that, but I would see that certain departments, like the development, that's going to be printing. But oftentimes it's easier for them to print off 3 copies of that package and hand it to somebody. That went twice on 2 occasions yesterday. We got 2 copies of a 6-page application form. On. So again, I don't know that we want to. I'm asking the question. It's like food. There's money spread throughout this budget for printing costs, and some more than others. Some we're going to use more than others. I'm just wondering if there's some way we can track it. We can track that. Discourage overuse of it. Yeah.
We can. I mean, it's a cost benefit. I mean, if you have to enter a code every time you go to the copier, then you've got the time and the maintenance to do that. And if I'm in a computer and I print, I'm guessing IT can probably set it up so that it knows where it's coming from automatically. We can look into that. I did not anticipate doing that with the organization our size. The copier cost, looking at fractions of a penny per page, so you're not talking about a lot. Printing and binding is more for the outside printing and binding that's coming in.
Well, I think a lot of those cost-saving initiatives can be things that I'd love to have, schools, universities around here come in, do studies, look at our organization and see if there are ways that we can improve efficiency and lower costs. I mean, I think, I agree that when you micromanage some of those costs, you add to the costs. I mean, looking at some of those expenses, I think can be done a lot of times from an outsider looking in and possibly identifying for organization efficiencies so we can use down the road.
Long story short, anything can be done. No doubt, that it's possible. We have the technology in place to do something like that. And, city manager and department heads can discuss the site from an operational standpoint. That's something
At some point, mid-year investment or somewhere, I'd like to see how those costs start to match up. Overall printing cost versus and spread budget. This is something that we do need to address. If mid-year we're halfway or 3/4 or more through our printing budget, then obviously we need to make some adjustments and try to figure out how that's working out. But all these little pieces and parts and attention would do, but at some point, look at it and you see the numbers, we're getting skewed one way or the other.
Absolutely. And I would say we need to do that for all line items.
Yeah.
Especially the first year, you're going to have to watch all those things.
Chris, just looking at this, it looks like we have about $100,000 in supplies between various departments. So we have Walmart. About $100,000 was done in supplies between all the departments. We just go through paperwork and get it out. Is that large enough to go out and get a bid to make sure you're getting pricing on your paper or your...
On some of the items, now all your office supplies have already been competitively bid. We've already done that through co-ops and other contracts that we're just jumping on top of, piggybacking. So there's, most of your purchasing is going to take place that way already. So, answer your questions, yes, it's, even when it's not high enough, there's usually somebody else where it is high enough that we can just join on with and make it work well.
Are there, I've heard mention the state contract, are there others where we can buy through those and take advantage of?
I know for years, LA County had the best office supplies contract, and just about everybody was just piggybacking off of that. I think it was with Office at the time, but you'll see these co-ops even at national levels where it's just very beneficial just to get along with that. Got 2 minutes.
Good work. So we're going to have to follow up on Monday and then some of these updates of the course. We're going to have some of this information available on Tuesday for the public hearing or forward. I mean, the board's going to be available online for updates we talked about today.
Yeah, I think as early as Tuesday, we probably can get an updated version to you and incorporate some of the changes that we've talked about so far. There may be some things that we still don't know, maybe like Georgia Power and Power.
Yeah.
But we'll definitely get you an updated version as well as updated online.
Does that contingency budget, is there a little bit of a rainy day fund anywhere built in, or is it just part of that contingency?
Yeah, there's not a rainy day fund this year as far as like building up your long-term reserves. We included a little bit of extra money in there for things that we may not have thought about that might address this year. And if you don't use all that, then it rolls into your rainy day fund. But this year's budget does not include any surplus for that purpose. And I wouldn't have expected it to. None of the other new cities really were able to plan on that in their first year. But by the 4 or 5 year mark, you should have a reasonable level of reserves for rainy days or opportunities that come up.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thank you, staff, for your time on Saturday morning. But it's a rainy Thursday, so it is late in the year. Good outside.
All time.
Meeting's adjourned.